Between the 13th and 18th centuries, the Indian subcontinent faced a constant influx of foreign invasions. Turk, Afghan, and Mongol forces poured over the mountains, continuously redrawing the political map. At the top level of power, this era was defined by brutal instability. Thrones were violently usurped. 2 out of every 3 sultans overthrew their predecessors. Campaigns routinely resulted in religious persecution and the destruction of temples and cultural sites. The sheer scale of this continuous warfare is overwhelming. Tens of thousands of soldiers, war elephants, and artillery trains were constantly mobilized across the continent to crush rebellions or expand borders. By standard historical logic, 500 years of endless conflict should reduce a region to ash and poverty. Yet, throughout this exact timeline of political chaos, the Indian subcontinent remained one of the wealthiest places on Earth. How did a society actually living and working beneath these burning thrones manage to survive, let alone thrive? The rulers of these empires, from Alauddin Khilji to Aurangzeb, operated on a model of massive extraction. They squeezed the civilian population with heavy taxes, sometimes taking half of a farmer's crop, specifically to fund the gigantic, centralized armies required to hold their territory. Later emperors attempted to integrate their territory. Akbar introduced the Mansabdari system, a strict ranking structure that organized regional nobility and supplied troops on demand. But even with these administrative updates, the empire was held together almost entirely by the threat of military force. You can see the result of that wealth extraction in the physical architecture. These massive stone structures and grand pavilions were built directly on the backs of provincial taxpayers. But extreme centralization carries a fatal flaw. The further an imperial army marched from its capital to conquer new territory, the harder it became to maintain supply lines and enforce any real authority. Imperial power was largely an illusion of control. The harder the emperors squeezed their distant territories to fund their armies, the more fiercely those regional borders pushed back. When these massive armies overextended, they triggered fierce regional friction. Local populations adapted their warfare directly to their specific geography and culture. In the northeast, the Ahom kingdom used their intimate knowledge of the treacherous Brahmaputra River and its monsoon-flooded forests to trap invading Mughal forces, drowning massive naval fleets and tens of thousands of soldiers. In the west, Rajput forces, allied with indigenous Bhil archers, retreated into the harsh Aravalli hills. Rather than meet the imperial military in open fields, they waged devastating, highly mobile guerrilla campaigns, striking swiftly and vanishing into the rock. In the north, pushback was ideological. Following intense religious persecution and the brutal execution of gurus, the Sikhs evolved into the Khalsa, a fierce, highly trained martial brotherhood that directly challenged imperial forces. The subcontinent's diverse geography and deep-rooted regional identities acted as a meat grinder for centralized armies. No single throne could ever permanently conquer the map. While kings and generals exhausted their treasuries on the battlefield, everyday merchants and farmers operated on a completely parallel track. This animated network shows the flow of the hundi system. It was a sophisticated written credit structure that allowed merchants to deposit goods in one region and cash out a written note far away, bypassing the need to transport physical gold. As dynasties violently replaced one another and political borders shifted above them, these credit lines remained steady and active. The economy functioned smoothly because it never required the capital's permission. In the south, large Hindu temples functioned as a second hidden engine. They operated like massive community banks, taking in donations and reinvesting that wealth to fund public irrigation systems and local trade networks, entirely independent of northern emperors. You can still see the permanent footprint of these independent economies today, grounded in heavy stone community infrastructure like these pavilions in Hampi. The empires monopolize the violence and the history books, but these decentralized local networks monopolize the actual wealth and survival mechanisms of the civilization. By the 18th century, the heavy Mughal administration finally collapsed under its own weight, and the political map shattered into regional pieces once again. These massive stone gates and grand palaces stand as heavy reminders of a top-down system that ultimately failed to hold. Despite the collapse of the throne, the underlying society had successfully synthesized new languages, built architectural wonders, and maintained highly productive trade networks that were now pulling in merchants from Europe. A civilization's resilience is built into its local networks, outlasting any throne that attempts to manage it from above. History is made by those who continue to build within the borders, no matter who draws them.